Welcome back to Their Future, Our Pod with Annie Andrews. I'm your host, Annie Andrews. Their Future, Our Pod is an Arena production. Arena is South Carolina's only progressive media company. If you haven't already, please go to the arenasc.substack.com and subscribe. Later today, we're going to be joined by someone I admire greatly, Jess Piper. But before we get to Jess, I want to talk about an issue that is near and dear to my heart as a child advocate. Now, this week, we are all appropriately thinking about attacks on our democracy with the ruling out of SCOTUS just earlier this week. And that's a lot to process. And as a non-lawyer and someone who is, by all intents and purposes, relatively new to political engagement, I don't know if I should feel like the end is near or if this is motivation to keep going, but I think it's probably both. But I'm not going to focus on the direct attacks on our democracy today. Rather, I'm going to focus on our ongoing attacks on our public education system. Because as a child advocate, I know there is really no bigger issue than to provide every child in this country with the foundation they need to reach their fullest potential. And that foundation for so many children in America starts with our public education system. I am the daughter of a teacher. I am the mother of 3 public school students. And this issue is so near and dear to my heart. So yes, we have seen recent attacks, of course, on women's rights. We have seen attacks on the environment with the recent SCOTUS Chevron decision, but today we're going to bring it back to these pervasive attacks on our schools. Now, over the past week and a half or so, I have made a series of satirical videos that I have posted on my own social media handles outlining how absurd the Republican position on public education is by highlighting 3 issues. And those issues are book bans, 10 commandments posted in public school classrooms, and arming teachers. Now, Michael and I talked about this on the first pod. You know, it'd be fine to have nuanced conversations about ways to optimize our children's education if our public school system wasn't failing so many children. But instead of focusing on fully funding public education system in states all across this country, instead of focusing on ways to innovate the way we teach America's children, we are inserting our cultural wedge issues into our classrooms. And by we, I mean Republican legislators in states all across this country. This is an extreme GOP play meant to attack our public education system so that they can systematically dismantle it, providing financial benefit to the already very rich people who back our school voucher scheme. So later today, as I said, we're going to have Jess Piper join us, and she is by far, in my opinion, the most effective messenger on what the school voucher scheme is. And what they call school choice or parents' choice is actually schools choosing what students they want to allow. And it is an insidious attack, and it is something we all need to be aware of, because if November 5th, 2024 does not go the way we want it to go, these attacks on our public education system are going to escalate rapidly. And as folks who care about children, we have to understand how to effectively push back this messaging war. When they say they are providing for parents' rights and providing school choice for every child in America, we need to turn the tables and help people understand that this is actually just a scheme to funnel public money into private schools, to make folks who run private schools richer, and to give discounts to already existing private school students. But again, we will talk more about this with Jess. So I wanted to go ahead and play a quick game, even though Michael is not with me today. He will join me for a pod in the very near future. But I think we can't skip the opportunity to play Brain Drain of the Week, because this day and age, there are so many opportunities to highlight ridiculous things that are coming out of Republicans' mouths. But this one really takes the cake. It's been circulating a lot online, so many of you have probably already heard this. I don't know if it'll sound more or less offensive coming out of my mouth than it did coming out of this person's mouth. But I'm going to read what he said, and we'll see what we have to say about it. Okay. I have an important announcement today regarding the Bible and the Ten Commandments. The Bible is a necessary historical document to teach our kids about the history of this country, to have a complete understanding of Western civilization, to have an understanding of the basis of our legal system, and is, frankly, when we are talking about the Bible, one of the most foundational documents used for the Constitution and the birth of our country. We also find major points in history that refer to the Bible. We see multiple figures, whether we are talking about the Federalist Papers, Constitutional Convention arguments, and MLK Jr., who used it as a tremendous impetus for the civil rights movement. And tying many of those arguments back to the Bible, it is essential that our kids have an understanding of the Bible and its historical context. So we will be issuing a memo today that every school district will adhere to, which is that every teacher, every classroom in the state will have a Bible in the classroom and will be teaching from the Bible in the classroom to ensure that this historical understanding is there for every student in the state of Oklahoma. Terrifying, yes? So that was Oklahoma School Superintendent Ryan Walter, who is now demanding that every classroom, every public school classroom in Oklahoma not only has a Bible, but that the teachers are required to teach from the Bible. And I think it's important when we get into this dialogue for people to understand that my position, the position of, public school supporters all across this country, is not anti-Bible. The Bible has its place in our society for people who want to engage with the Bible, but the Bible certainly does not have its place in public school classrooms. And this infiltration of Christianity into our public school system is akin to the infiltration of politics, extreme right-wing politics, into our healthcare system. These institutions, our public school system, our nation's leading healthcare systems, should be protected from the infiltration of politics. But unfortunately, all of these societal norms are being threatened right now. And to me, what Ryan Walter in Oklahoma said is one of the most extreme examples of pushing a personal religious agenda into one of our government institutions. Now, I'm not anti-Bible. I am certainly anti-Bible in public school classrooms, but I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school. My parents chose for me to go to Catholic school. So I learned from the Bible kindergarten through 12th grade. But that was my parents' choice. And if you are sending your children to public school, we cannot force Christianity upon our children. We certainly can't force our teachers to teach it. Our teachers need to be focusing on preparing our children for the real world. And so this is just the latest egregious overstep of the extreme Republican state legislators all across this country. But I thought I'd go over a few statistics because, like I said, I've been talking about the 10 Commandment bills, the book banning bills, the arming teacher bills that are propagating all over this country. So there are more than a dozen states that have 10 Commandment bills. We were picking on Louisiana last week on the pod, but more than a dozen states have 10 Commandment bills. And I have since learned, of course, that South Carolina is making moves to similarly require the 10 Commandments to be displayed in our public school classrooms. There are book bans, of course, all over this country. In the first half of 2023, there were 1,477 instances of individual books banned. The states with the most books banned, hold on to your hats here, folks, Texas, Florida, Missouri, Utah, and South Carolina. These book bans overwhelmingly target books about people of color and LGBTQ populations. So again, this is extreme Republican legislators using our children in their political games, infiltrating our public school classrooms with their political agenda. And most alarmingly, this is harming real children. It's excluding children, it's erasing populations of children, and it is the sign of a democracy in decline. Now, I found some incredible book banning information from PEN America, so I recommend that you all go to pen.org and read about book bans. There was a national news story about book bans in Beaufort County, South Carolina. We all just need to be aware about what's going on. And yes, we're going to have to continue showing up at school board meetings and using our voices and pushing back against these politically motivated attacks on our children's education. So earlier this week, I released a satirical video. Again, there are some people out there who don't realize these videos are satirical, about arming teachers, specifically about the Tennessee legislature's response to the horrific shooting at the Covenant School, not by passing common sense gun laws that are evidence-based and that are supported by the majority of Americans, but rather, of course, they decided to pass a law to arm teachers. And in the Tennessee arming teachers bill, I learned that there are 40 hours of tactical shooting training. I don't even know if tactical shooting is the way to describe it. But again, this is absurd. But the point is, the people making these laws, the people who are hell-bent on putting 10 Commandments and Bibles in our classrooms are the same people who refuse to pass common sense gun laws like background checks and secure storage laws and red flag laws that will protect our children in the classroom. And they're the same people who refuse to accept federal funding to feed hungry school children, who refuse to make school lunch free, who withhold nutritious food from our students when their lunch debt gets too high. They are saying the quiet part out loud. They do not care about our nation's children. And seeing these attacks pop up in our public school system is just a bridge too far for me. This fight is happening in all of our communities. And if you are not already involved, I encourage you very much to get involved in local school board elections and to show up at local school board meetings, because we have to have a unified voice to push back against these evil forces that are organized under the Moms for Liberty umbrella. Moms for Liberty is not about children. It's about radical right-wing extremist legislators. If we don't push back, if we don't succeed in November, the GOP will continue on its successful quest to redefine the ABCs to mean active shooters, book bans, and commandments. So stay tuned for my conversation with Jess Piper. Thanks so much. All right, Jess, thank you so much for joining me today. I feel like I know you. We've been following each other on Twitter for a very long time. Huge fan of your work. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Annie, for everything you do. I've been following you too. That Katie Britt skit was right on the mark. Good job.
Thank you so much. I don't know where that came from. And it's funny where life takes you. But if that's the way to get the message across this election season, you know what? I'm all in.
Exactly.
All right. So I brought you here today because I love your messaging on school choice, school vouchers. As a child advocate, this is an issue that I am deeply passionate about, and an issue where I feel like the Democratic Party is sort of on its heels. And we need to figure out how to push back against this anti-child policy agenda, which is school choice and school vouchers. So if you don't mind, just break it down for us. What is so bad about school choice, school vouchers, and how do we effectively message against this in this upcoming incredibly important election cycle?
First, the name of it is so rage-inducing. It is not a parent's choice where they're going to send their kids. It's a school's choice whether they're going to accept their kid or not. A regular public school, your community school down the road, in fact, has to take every single child and meet every child where they are. School choice these places can discriminate. If you're gay, if your kids are gay, if you're not the right religion, if your kiddo has, a 504, an IEP, any sort of learning disability, they don't have to accept your child. So there is no choice. And I want to get that through. And especially if you live in an area like I do, 480 people in the middle of cornfields and bean fields, the closest place I could, get a voucher and send my daughter is an hour one way. And by the way, it's Catholic and we're not Catholic. So these things are problematic. But to talk about the history of vouchers, vouchers came out of, Brown versus Board, when white parents were, didn't want to send their kids to school with black kids because the schools have been desegregated. And we know this, and it's very clear because they took state money, created vouchers to send kids to what they called segregation academies. I mean, they were very they were very explicit about it in the beginning. And I always tell people we should go back to saying it like that. These aren't private religious schools. These are segregation academies. And you also know it by looking through the handbooks, through the schools that are accepting state vouchers. They are very clear that they are trying to, off-ramp parents who want their kids going to all white schools because they're using the word woke. They're using the word diversity, equity, inclusion. And Annie, you're like, what's wrong with those words? And why are you against it?
Right.
And two, that shows you that they are meaning to make this a segregated system again.
Right. They're saying the quiet part out loud. These are segregation schools. What bothers me so much about this, I think it fits into a broader context of the Republican Party using our children in their political games. Because let's be honest, most of the folks who are out there, like Tim Scott, talking about parents' choice, school choice, they don't actually care about the public education system. They don't care about putting children in the school that is a best fit for them. They're just using our children in these political games. So, why are they so good at this, and how do we stop it?
It's really frustrating. So Missouri has had a GOP supermajority for almost 22 years. They have defunded our schools this entire time. Missouri teachers are 50th in starting pay. The starting pay rate by the state of Missouri is $25,000 a year.
Oh my God.
So we have, and most schools don't start at that, but the teachers in the schools around where I am are starting around $33,000, $34,000 a year. After they take out 14% for, teacher retirement and then taxes, these teachers are walking around with $1,500 in their pocket an entire month. They can't pay rent. They can't buy a house. A house. That's insane. They can't pay for their rent. They can't pay back the student loan that they had to take out $100,000 to be able to make $33,000 a year, right? And all these Republicans are like, oh, we're not paying back Ivy League people's loans through loan forgiveness. And I was like, you're paying back the teacher at North Nottoway who makes $33,000 a year, right?
Right.
But when you pay teachers this low rate, you create a revolving door of teachers. So we'll have a new teacher in second grade, and then a new one in third, and then a new one in fourth. And so you've got a room or a building full of teachers who, bless their hearts, I was a new teacher too, but who are 24, 25 years old, right? And this is where we start to see trouble. And so you'll have a GOP supermajority like ours. When test scores came out a few months ago, they were like, look, these are so bad. And this is why we should do something different. And you're like, who's in charge?
Right.
You did it. What do you mean? This is your failure. And they turn it, right? It's smoke and mirrors. Everything is a lie that they do. In Missouri, 30% of schools are on a 4-day week. Our kids are not privy, and it's in rural areas mostly, they're not privy to 5-day-a-week schools, right? Their teachers are lowest in the country. We are 49th in educational funding. And now they're like, well, this is the perfect, ripe environment for choice. And again, they did it on purpose. They purposely created this terrible system that would fall apart so they could introduce private schools, religious schools, and make them open for taxpayer funding. And by the way, schools that my kid has no access to, right? Every rural kid, and I want to be real specific about this. If you are listening right now and you are a rural person, those vouchers do not apply to you. There is nowhere for you to go.
Exactly. I love what you said about this is their public education system. The lawmakers have been defunding the public education system in Missouri, just like they have in South Carolina. And then they say, oh, the public education system isn't very good. Let's give children a choice. And it's maddening. And I liken it to, say you're a manager and owner of a Chili's restaurant, right? And your food quality is going down, your customer service is going down, you have fewer customers. And rather than make your Chili's better, you give them all gift certificates to go next door to Applebee's.
Right.
It literally makes no sense. Like, you are in charge of the public school system, take some ownership of that. But like you said, they've done this all on purpose. This isn't just like a series of events that has happened over time. There is a very dark agenda here,
And
which
we've
is,
Yeah,
go
we've
ahead.
seen it for decades, and you can look to Michigan and see what DeVos has done there and how she destroyed their public systems. And when people talk about, well, you should have access. What about charters and that sort of thing? Okay, you want to talk about charters? Go to Louisiana, go to New Orleans, and you show me what happens when you dismantle the public school system, which is what they did after Katrina, and they instituted a charter system that is absolutely failing those kids. They do this. We have the proof to show that vouchers don't work. And not only do they not work, they also drain public coffers. Look at Arizona, a $900 million budget shortfall because of vouchers. Kansas, when we had Brownback, what did they do? They quit funding roads. They were closing hospitals. They were doing things because they were trying to fund a separate system. So Annie, you have to think. They're saying we don't have the money to fund public school. So why are you trying to create a separate system? If you don't have
Right.
money to fund this one, it's like you said. If you're running an Applebee's and then you want to also open up a Chili's, you're going to have to spread this out, right?
Right.
None of it makes any sense, but it's not supposed to make sense. They're supposed to have this one tagline: fund students, not systems. Well, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, friend. If you're sending taxpayer money to a private school, that's a system, right? You're all of a
Exactly.
sudden, you're a government school now. Congratulations.
That's right. A government school that doesn't have to follow the same level of accountability that our public school system does,
Right,
right?
right.
And then talk a little bit about, so let's say you have a student who's in the perfect situation and there is a private school that they can get to without having to commute an hour each way. Does a school voucher actually fully fund the tuition for that private school, Jess?
No, we've seen this. Iowa is a perfect example. Last year they passed vouchers, and nearly every Iowa public or a private school has raised their tuition. So their tuition previously might have been $10,000, and they got a coupon for 7,500, and now they're like, oh, our tuition is actually 13,000. So that's another part of the game. And here's the thing: when people think of private schools, they think of lush lawns and beautiful scenery and plaid skirts and oh, Captain, my Captain, Dead Poet Society, right? That's
Mhm.
not what a voucher buys you. That's what 20 grand buys you. And that's not a voucher. That's an elite school that our kids aren't going to be invited to. Our kids are going to use that voucher in the basement of a Baptist church, looking at a cinder block wall, filling out worksheets with uncertified mentors, not even teachers, walking around. Maybe you have access to a computer that you sit on all day long, but this is not an elite education. Those people who get elite educations are not going to allow our children in those schools.
Right. So aside from creating a wedge issue every election season, which is what this talking point does, who's benefiting from these voucher systems? Because it's not our children.
It's not our children. It's usually billionaires who are creating these schools so that they can pull tax money from the general public. But it's also people who are religious extremists. There's a reason they're rolling back child labor laws at the same time they're, defunding public schools. Because the whole thing is that my kid's not worth educating. My kid is not worth the tax money. She needs, fifth or sixth grade education, and then she needs to head out to the field. And Betsy DeVos was very explicit in saying that she thought, because someone asked her, a reporter said, what does school choice look like in a rural area? And she said, well, I think they could listen to great books on headphones while they're out in the fields. And maybe they could get, a tutor in the evenings after they're done working at the John Deere plant, learning, how to run these systems. That's what she thinks of our children. And that's what they all think of our children. And I just read an article, and it was from one of the Carolinas, where one of these religious extremists said that she thought they should just close schools in rural communities and the kids could go to church. Literally said to use the church buildings and get, educated
Yes.
in church.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Every rural person in this country should be enraged. I don't care if you're a Republican or not. They're coming for your kid too. It's not just me. It's all of ours.
It's exactly right. They want to get them in the labor force. Whenever I think about child labor laws, I think about Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and it's disgusting. They literally want to turn our children into the labor force. And it is very dark and disturbing for those of us who are paying attention. All of these things happening at the same time. Ellen Weaver is the South Carolina state superintendent. She is an extremist. She was on that stage with Tim Scott talking about these micro schools in church classrooms where all children of all the same age just go to a church and that's their school. So she has very dark plans for the public education system in South Carolina. And anyone who knows anything about child development understands that public education is the foundation on which we build a stronger society. And every child deserves access to a quality public education. And the attacks we are seeing are just unprecedented and so alarming. So I don't know how deep you've dug into Project 2025.
Well, I read the entire education part. It was 44 pages. And I'm telling you, right from the gate, they told it because they said the very first paragraph, they think we should go back to Milton Friedman's vision for public schools. And Milton Friedman is the one who said that Black children shouldn't have to go to school with white children and to create the segregation academies. Milton Friedman also said that if parents, that the state should be required to give a rudimentary education to all children. And then if parents can't afford it after that, which would be fourth, fifth, or sixth grade, they go to work. He was very, very clear. And you brought up Sarah Huckabee Sanders. In Arkansas, they passed a voucher scheme. 95% of the kids who got the voucher were already in a private school. That means it's just a coupon for them, right? Mm-hmm. And beyond that, she passed a law saying that to graduate from a public school, not private, public school in Arkansas, you had to have 75 volunteer hours. It's free labor. She's forcing every single child in a public school in Arkansas to give free labor to local corporations. Where would my kid volunteer, right? She would volunteer at, a lot full of hogs, cleaning out pens. She would volunteer detasseling corn, right? There's no place for our kids to volunteer. Now, if your dad's a lawyer, you could probably volunteer in his office. Those kids are going to have it, right? But the rest of our kids, and by the way, how are they getting there? How's my kid getting there? Right. It just created this huge problem, and it's purposeful.
It is. It is. And it's profit driven. It's anti-child. And what I'm trying to figure out, Jess, is how do we get through to your average, and here I live in the suburbs of Charleston. How do you get through to your average white suburban woman voter who maybe grew up in a Republican household back when the Republican Party was not quite so extreme? How do we get through to them so that they understand that this is on the ballot in addition to gun violence prevention and reproductive freedom and everything else that is on the ballot this November? How do we break through?
I always remind everyone that I talk to that they graduated from a public high school. We all graduated from a public high school. This is what happened when we got together and created a country, that we were going to educate everybody. And the only way to make sure we educate everybody is to send them to a free and fair public school that meets them where they are, that we don't discriminate against children with disabilities, because that's a huge issue that I would think suburban moms probably don't think about. If you have a kid with dyslexia, right? They can't go to this school because they're not going to score well on the test. So it's even, minor, which it's not a minor affliction. I have a child with dyslexia, but you know what I'm saying? We all know someone who has a little bit of a learning disability or a learning curve, and these kids are going to be kept out of schools. And also, this is why, Annie, it's so important that we have Democratic nominees in every single district, on every ballot, in every state, because those are the boots on the ground. Those are the people knocking doors. So if you have districts that are going, uncontested, they're not hearing the message. All they're seeing is that, that information silo, choice, which sounds good. It's like right to work. Man, that sounds good. I want the right to work. And you're like, oh, the right to work for less. Dang. Right. So it's just talking to your neighbors. I talked to several people when I was knocking doors, and they would say, school choice sounds great. And I was like, friend, where would that be? And they're like, oh God, it didn't even occur to me. Right. There's no place to send them. And so It's just talking to your neighbors. It's called deep canvassing, right? It's standing
Yeah.
at the door and having a conversation and saying the things you said. Not only are reproductive rights on the ballot, ma'am, but so is your child's school, right? And when you're talking about people in rural areas, it's all we've got left. They have absolutely decimated our towns. They are gone, right? There is
Hmm.
nothing in my town. The school is the largest employer. It's the place where people get their health insurance. It's where every kid gets breakfast and lunch,
Hmm.
and they are trying to gut it. So when people always think that, rural folks are Republican, or no, absolutely we're not. But also a lot of times we don't have anyone else to vote for, because
Right.
our races aren't contested. But when you talk to them about issues about schools, which are not, they're not aligned politically, every one of us is, dependent on our local school. And that's how you break through.
That's right. That's right. And I think we need more messengers like you, messengers who can really just get to the heart of the matter and take these really dangerous talking points. They're so good at the one-liners, and we have to push back, and we have to do it in a way that meets people where they are. We have a tendency, I believe, in the Democratic Party to get so wonky, to bring our PowerPoint slides and to show the data, data, data. And that does not break through to the average busy person who's trying to make ends meet, trying to put dinner on the table. We have to break through. So thank you so much for all the work you do to get this message out there. I do want to end by playing a little game called Highs and Lows. I don't know if you did this with your children at the dinner table ever. I try to do it sometimes. I'm not as good at doing it anymore. But talk to me about something this week that got you fired up, that made you angry, and then that's your low, and then tell me your high, which is something going on in the world that gives you hope.
My low was receiving a sunshine request fulfilled by someone else who had put in a request to find out the emails and what was going on with the local school called the St. Joseph School District, about an hour south of me, that I used to work in. And they found out, and we were talking about this before, but I found out through emails that a lot of these sweet Christian people that are sitting in the pews every single week are getting disinformation. And so they were writing to school board to ask if they could challenge a book, but then they would say, I haven't actually read it. Do I need to read it before I challenge it? And that was oh my God. Right? You don't tell them that you didn't read the book, but they're so sweet and follow the rules, and then they're
Right.
they're given, fed these lines. So that was
Right.
my low. But my high is I'm heading out and flying out on Friday to speak in DC to a huge women's summit. And I'm representing the rural part of the country, because people look at me and they're like, she must be a unicorn, right? There's no one like her. And I'm like, friends, there are so
Mm-hmm.
many like me. They're afraid to be as loud as me because, like, you'll literally lose your job, right?
Right.
Um,
Yep.
and what happened to me. I lost my teaching career. I can't go back to teaching in these tiny schools. When I talked about abortion, right? It's people say, I don't want my kid in her class. She eats babies.
Mm. Oh my
So
God.
that's another low. But beside the point, I'm speaking on the realities of red spaces and how we can take them back. And we know we can do that by showing up, by coming back to areas that we've let go because it was too red. And I always say, how's that working out? Right? Just focusing on flippable districts. How's it working out? Look at Missouri. There's not one Democrat elected statewide. That's how it's working out. So
Mm-hmm.
we come back when we say what we need to do, and it's going to be a great summit with a whole lot of people who will finally hear a message of, I'm not a unicorn.
That's amazing. I can't wait to hear how that goes. And I think we're going to have a follow-up conversation, because you just talked about the risks of speaking up on these issues and losing your job. And I think you and I have experienced very parallel stories there. So I definitely want to have you back on at some point to talk more about that, because, here we both are still speaking up because the stakes are too high, right?
What are
The
we going
stakes
to
are too
do?
high. Right.
We can't leave. I'm not leaving Missouri. You're probably not leaving your state.
That's right.
The only thing we
That's
can
right.
do is still fight back.
That's right. Because every child in Missouri, every child in South Carolina deserves what children in California and New York get. We cannot abandon them. We have to keep fighting. So, Jess, thank you so much for joining me. How can people follow you, learn more about the work you do, hear more from you?
So I have a Substack. It's called The View from Rural Missouri. And then I'm also the executive director of Blue Missouri. And what we do is fund down ballot candidates, the reddest nominees in the reddest districts, because, like I said, Democrats are like, it's too red. And I'm like, you stick your neck out and we've got your back, right? So
That's
they
right.
can find me at both places and obviously on all the social medias. If I could leave Twitter, my God, girl, I would run that cesspool.
I know, Jess, but we are in too deep. We cannot leave.
I know. I know.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much again for all the incredibly important work you're doing on behalf of America's children. Thank you for being loud. Thank you for being brave. And thank you so much for joining me today.
And I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess.